ACC Nation football preview with our special guest from The Athletic and the podcast, Wide Right Pod. It's Manny Navarro. Thanks, Manny, for joining us with a Miami football preview.
Thank you, gentlemen. Had fun doing it with you last year. Why not do it again?
Now, why not?
We're back.
we're missing out tonight, man. It didn't come to fruition. Maybe it'll come to fruition sometime this week. The new ACC, we'll see. We'll get your thoughts on that as we progress here, because everybody has got some really interesting spins on their perspective on what the new conference would look like or not. So we'll see. But first, let's talk about Miami football, because last year we talked about, is the U back, Manny? And I'm going to ask you once more, is the U back?
If you mean they're back for another 7-5 or 8-4 season, I say yes, they're back for one of those. If you say they're back to winning a national championship, I said you better get in a DeLorean and speed up a couple of years, because that's not happening for a while.
Not yet.
No.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, it's right to the point. Hey, the one thing I do like about this team is it seems to have an immense amount of depth. They're young, but there's a lot of depth. So that's the sort of team that would scare me as an opposing coach. I would be looking at this team and thinking to myself, I think I may want to prepare a little bit extra for what is coming. And, the other thing is that in the back of my mind, I can't help but think that Mario Cristobal and this team may have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, that they want to prove something. So tell us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's certainly a different perspective this year. Last year didn't sit well. 42 new players, 7 new assistant coaches. And the leadership council of this team has completely changed. They had 6 guys last year that sort of ran it. This year, through a team vote, they appointed 13 guys. So it just shows you in general that the players sort of respect some of the transfers and some of the guys who have sort of grown with this program. So I think overall, this is a different team than the one we saw a year ago. Now they just have to go out and prove it on Saturday and Friday nights.
So, we started this out with asking, is the U back? And you have always been straightforward and honest, at least with us. Mm-hmm. So I want to know what your gut feel is with this team. You said what you thought maybe the record might be, but let's delve a little deeper. I really want to get into your gut feel for this team, Manny. What do you see as their strengths and their weaknesses, and what they might accomplish if everything comes together?
Yeah, I think really when you look back at what Miami was a couple seasons ago under Manny Diaz, when I thought they had a pretty good year with Tyler Van Dyke, the final 6 games of that season, they beat Pittsburgh, who of course went on to win the conference championship in Pittsburgh. They played well down the stretch of that. I felt like that was supposed to be the team we were going to see last year, right? Tyler Van Dyke was going to continue that momentum. I think if Tyler can get back to being the quarterback he was for that 6-game stretch, and I know that's asking a lot. He had 20 touchdowns and 3 interceptions during that little 6-game window at the end of the 21 season. But if he can get back to resembling that guy more, and I think he will in this new offense that Shannon Dawson is running. I think he's got a better collection of receivers this year. I think he's got certainly a better offensive line blocking in front of him. I think that, this team's going to score enough points to put themselves in position to win 7 to 8 games. I don't think the schedule is very easy. They have Florida State and Clemson, the 2 best teams, I think, by far in the conference. And I think it's going to put a strain on them, and whenever they face big time opponents. Same thing when Texas A&M comes to town. That's a very talented team. I think when they line up against really talented teams, there's still going to be some deficiencies. I think cornerback is one position. I think defensive tackle is potentially another position I worry about. Certainly receiver, there's more talent, there's more depth, but still don't have a guy who's proven. So I think, this is a team that on paper should be better simply because of all the changes they made, scheme, everything else, bringing in transfers the way that they did, 16 transfers, signing some really good freshmen. But I don't think Miami's out of the woods in terms of the rebuilding, growing pains that you're going to endure. It's hard to count on true freshmen to come in and play a lot. And I think there's going to be some spots where there are going to be some true freshmen playing a lot.
Very true. Will's going to get into the X's and O's with you.
Yeah, so you were talking about potential true freshmen getting a. I think where we might see that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Manny, but the offensive line is a spot where we could see that. I know that's Mario Cristobal's bread and butter. He loves having a really good offensive line, and he really did that with the class of 2023. And he, with the I think it was Malagoa. Unfortunately, I deleted my notes by accident, but
it's okay.
He had a couple. He was a really highly touted kid, and there's another one on the up front that could play some of the freshmen too, right?
Samson Okunlola, both of them were 5-star recruits. Samson's out of Massachusetts, and Francis Maui Noah, him and his brother, who Miami picked up in the transfer portal, are two American Samoan-born boys, Polynesians, who really, gonna, I think, make a big impact here. They're just, two really big, strong guys. His brother's on the defensive side, but Francis is probably going to be the starting right tackle from beginning to end. So to get to your point, yes, certainly two really talented freshmen in Okunlola and Maui Noa.
What about the rest of the line? I know that position was a little banged up last year. I know Zion Nelson was somebody everyone's been really high on, but he was banged up. Probably will miss the beginning of this season too. But what about the rest of the O line?
Yeah, well, Mario went into the transfer portal. I think he probably got his second best player on offense in Matt Lee out of the University of Central Florida. Matt was a 3-year starter at UCF, and I know people sometimes downplay the center position and say, well, he's not facing those speed edge rushers. Well, no, he's not, but he's certainly pointing out where all the pressure is coming from on the defensive side. And when you've got a really, really good center, he can really bring that whole offensive line together. And that was a huge pickup for them. So was Javian Cohen, a 2-year starter at Alabama at left guard. Javian kind of was getting beat out by a younger guy as the season progressed at Alabama, wanted a fresh start, decided to come to Miami. I think he's an upgrade. And then you've got two returning starters, one of them who was a true freshman last year, Inez Cooper at right guard. Mario Cristobal likes to say he's down to 355 pounds. And he's a very large human being, 6'6", 355. And then Jalen Rivers, who has been a starter on and off through injuries the last 2 years. He's your left tackle. So I think without question, this is probably the most talented offensive line Miami has had in a decade in terms of guys that I think are NFL caliber type linemen down the road. I think Matt Lee will be playing on Sundays, and I think Javian Cohen has a chance to play on Sundays. And of course, the two freshmen that we already talked about.
So one of the things I know I saw you tweet out today, contrary to what it's called now, I'm still going to call it Twitter. But
Yeah.
one of the things that you tweeted out today during Shannon Dawson's press conference is that there really hasn't been a guy that stepped up at receiver lately or so far during practice. Who do you see anybody on this core that could be that one?
Yeah, I think Colby Young showed flashes last year. He's a 6'5", 215-pound kid who came to Miami from Lackawanna College. Mario kind of picked him up late in the recruiting process before last year, and Colby was sort of out of shape coming into Miami. He's really, really, I think his physique has completely changed. He looks like a different guy. He was playing sort of a tight end slash receiver at his previous stop. Now at Miami, he looks like a legitimate big play receiver. And if you go back and you watch the footage of the Virginia Tech game last year before Tyler got hurt and injured his shoulder, he was, I mean, the two of them had some really good chemistry. Colby was laying out for balls, making big catches down the field. And so I think there's a hope that he will emerge as the true number one guy because he's got a lot of gifts physically. The other guy obviously is Xavier Restrepo, who's a slot receiver who's been Tyler Van Dyke's best friend since they both set foot at Miami. I think those two guys are sort of looked at as 1A and 1B. But again, neither of them have a track record, right? They don't have a season-long track record. They've shown flashes. And so you're absolutely right. This is a team that needs a guy to step up and sort of become the man.
Something Dawson also said today is that they're going to use more of a committee approach at running back. And we know Henry Parrish will probably be one of the guys. So who are the other guys you see in this committee?
Well, Miami went out and picked up a big time transfer, AJ Allen, who was a true freshman at Nebraska last year. AJ ended up breaking his collarbone about 3 or 4 games into the season. But when he was in there for Nebraska, he looked really, really good. Had a few breakaway runs, ran for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns, I think, on only 33 touches. So Miami's really excited about him. He flashed in the first scrimmage this fall. I think AJ, he's sort of built the same way Henry is, 5'10", 5'11", 190 pounds. Those I think those two guys are sort of interchangeable. The big guy, the big new addition is Mark Fletcher, who's 6'1", 225. And Mark, I watched him his senior year of high school at Plantation American Heritage, which of course one of the national powers now, one of the biggest producers of NFL talent. And he's just a different guy. He's a different level running back. Yes, he's only a true freshman, but I think you're going to see a lot of him in the fourth quarter when Miami has a lead. He is going to be the dude pounding the rock and picking up first downs and being sort of Mario's bulldozer. So between those three guys, I'm pretty confident their running game is improved.
So we know Cristobal loves to run the football, and that's something he's loved to do. But we also know Dawson is kind of he's more different. We like to, he's a little more antithetical in that way.
Yeah.
Is this kind of a Cristobal realizing that the offense in college football today needs to be a little opened up a little more?
I hope so, William, because I don't know what you could call what Miami's offense was last year. I mean, it was really ugly. That's probably the one word you could use for it. And I think, is Cristobal really giving up on the run, or is he going to run this, sort of air raid offense? I don't know that it's going to be an air raid offense, that they're going to chuck it 60 times a game.
Right.
I think this is going to be a very balanced offense, and I think at times it's going to resemble a spread run offense, because you have like I said, 3 backs that I think could all really be successful with that offensive line that they've got blocking in front of them. So I think you'll see a lot of balance. I think you'll see at times Tyler sort of take his shots deep down the field and then just dump it off to his receivers and getting the ball out quickly so that they can make plays in space. I think it's going to resemble much more of what we saw with Rhett Lashley, which was more sort of a power spread. That's what Lashley liked to call it a couple of years ago when he was a coach. So that's what I think this offense is going to look like.
Couldn't ask for a better character name for Gone with the Wind, Rhett Lashley. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Hey, talk to me for a second about Tyler Van Dyke and who's coming up behind him, because sooner or later he's not there. And
Yeah.
I have some question as to who's stepping into those shoes.
It's a huge question, Jim, because I think while Jakari Brown got his feet wet last year, he got 2 starts, one at Georgia Tech, one at Clemson. Those 2 starts were vastly different, right? Miami went on the road, won in Atlanta with him, made some great plays with his legs. He found open receivers. He threw the ball well. Against Clemson, he looked like a guy that was completely a fish out of water. Just couldn't play quarterback that night at Clemson. And I think at times, he is too reliant on his feet and making throws on the run, and his accuracy just isn't there. You saw it in the spring game. You saw it in the fall scrimmage. Emory Williams is much more the true freshman that they signed out of Milton, Florida, an Elite 11 finalist that was rated a 3-star, number 614 in his class. But he still made it to California for the Elite 11. He is much more of a Tyler Van Dyke type quarterback, a pocket passer, a guy who, when you go back and you look at that spring game and you watch him throw, to me, there were times he looked better than Tyler reading the defense. So Emory, I think, has some of his own gifts, his own ability, but he's a true freshman. So Mario wouldn't answer the question today as far as who the backup quarterback is. But I think if you just sit there and pay attention to the kind of offense that they ran this spring and the kind of offense they want to be, I think Emory Williams is more of a fit for what could potentially happen if Tyler Van Dyke were to go down again. He is sort of the easier sort of plug and play guy. Jakari has his strengths, and if I'm Miami, I'm not looking to get rid of him by any shape or fashion. He's the third fastest player on the team, runs almost 23 miles an hour. There are gifts. Jakari Brown is a valuable gift, but I think he's certainly a different fit than Emory Williams is in this offense.
Maybe they'll find a place to plug him in for special plays, wildcat, etc. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of using a quarterback with those sort of skills. We'll see. It's all about the points too, because everybody loves to see the points go up on the board. And if you can keep them ahead of your opponent, you're good to go, which leads us into defense. So let me talk a little bit about, you and Will were talking about the difference here with Miami on offense, being between running and passing. And you mentioned chucking up 60 passes a game. There are teams in the conference and that they will face that are non-conference that will chuck up 60 passes per game. The question, I'm going to start not with the line, but the secondary. Let's talk about that part of Miami's defense, because that's what's going to shut down opponents.
Yeah, Mario had to go into the transfer portal and find help after last season. DJ Ivy was a 3-year starter for him. Tyreek Stevenson started for 2 years, and both of those guys are on NFL rosters now. They didn't necessarily have great careers at Miami. You go back and you put on that Middle Tennessee State tape, and both of those guys want to burn it, right? They don't want anybody to see that tape. So this is a very precarious position. To me, cornerback is the one area when I look at and I say, man, do they really have an upgrade there over what they had a year ago? And I can't say for sure yes, because anytime you take a transfer, it's risky. That said, Mario is very excited about Devontae Brown, who comes over from UCF. Devontae's a 31-game starter. Before last season, he kind of took a step back last year. His sophomore year at UCF, he had a great year. Some people were even saying maybe this is an NFL guy. Well, Devontae's on the roster now. His younger brother, Damari, who was an All-American at American Heritage, which we've already mentioned American Heritage once on this podcast. Damari was an excellent player, one of the best in the country. I think the two of those guys are probably your starters on the outside, but you will see some of these other veterans that Miami has gone into the portal and picked up. Besides Devontae Brown, you will have Jadaeus Richard, transferred from Vanderbilt, who played some safety and corner. You'll see Jaden Davis, who was a slot corner primarily at Oklahoma. And then Daryl Porter Jr., who came in the year before from West Virginia, didn't really play much last year, only played 205 snaps. Those are the 5, I think, guys that can play on the outside. And then Corey Couch is a returning starter in the slot in that nickel spot. He's a 22-game starter, over 1,700 career snaps. Experience. He's the one sort of guy who's been in this defense for a while at that cornerback position. But still, it's a position that you go into the season, you say, man, I really hope they get after the quarterback this year so they don't have to be out there defending that long.
Well, we're about to find out if they have the capability of doing that. One thing I want to point out here, that you've mentioned UCF twice now, and I want to point this out to a lot of fans at other Florida schools. There's an awful lot of good players at UCF and USF, and they're going to be spreading out and moving around. So maybe not taking so many shots at these guys is a good idea, because they may be coming in handy for you later. Let's talk about that line. Is it going to be able to stop the run? Because that is key. It's all those big boys right up front, right then there in the gravy. Are they going to bring it home?
That's a tough question to answer. Miami lost a 13 or actually a 12-game starter in Daryl Jackson to rival Florida State. Daryl's a kid from the Florida Panhandle who went back home to be closer to his mother. But this is the third time actually the second time he's transferred. So Florida State is fighting for him to get a waiver to play this year. It doesn't look like it's going to happen for him. But Daryl was huge part of this Miami defense last year. I mentioned the 12 starts, 6'6", over 300 pounds, just a big force in the middle. Miami really didn't replace him. They looked in the portal for help. They looked for an older guy who had some experience, and they really weren't able to get it. Branson Dean is a different type of defensive tackle. He comes over from Purdue, where he started, played over 1,500 snaps. He's a fifth-year senior, 6'2", 280. That's not 6'6", 300 plus. And that makes a difference in how you sort of play up front. And Lance Guidry, the defensive coordinator today, talked about that a little bit, how, hey, we're going to have to play a little different. Doesn't mean we can't stop the run. It just means we're going to have to play a little different style in trying to stop the run. And so you're going to see him in the middle. You're going to see Leonard Taylor, the 5-star recruit who's going into his third year. Leonard's a guy who started 10 games last year, but he'll tell you himself, he took some plays off. He didn't play to the level that he could have. So that's why I'm worried about D tackle. Uh, you'll also see Jared Harrison Hunt, another guy who's played a whole lot at Miami, close to 900 career snaps there. I think he's sort of the third D tackle, in terms of rotating in there. And I think Miami's in a much better position, and that's just because they've got some experience and they've got some really good young talent. Akeem Mesidor, who came over from West Virginia last year, led them in sacks and tackles for loss. He's back. He's healthy. He had to kind of be held out of camp a little bit as he was recovering from surgery at the end of last year, but he's a 9-game starter. I think he was all ACC honorable mention. He's a guy that, to me, fourth year, he's going to be effective. Jafari Harvey, who's another guy with 1,100 snaps in his career, 14 starts. He's another rotational piece. The two kids that I'm really, really excited about at end, Nigel Kelly coming back for his second year. Nigel Leake's a guy Jason Taylor is super fired up about. He was a top 100 recruit coming out of Fort Lauderdale Dillard a couple years ago. And then Ruben Bain. You're going to hear Ruben Bain's name a lot the next 3 years in the ACC. One of the best players in the country. 58 and a half sacks in high school as a junior and senior at Miami Central, a team that won 4 consecutive state championships. He is a beast, and you felt him in the spring. He enrolled early. He was already making an impact in the spring game. I think he had 2 or 3 sacks in the spring game. So those are your edge rushers. I think much like I said, a much deeper position. You've got some other veterans as well, guys that have just been in the system for a while. But those are 4 of the main edge rushers and the D tackles we've already touched on.
Will, take the rest of the D and break it down for us.
Yeah, so we haven't gotten into linebackers yet, except for we kind of glanced over Malago's brothers transferred in at linebacker from, I believe he was at Wazoo, right?
Yeah, Washington State.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And then there was a little bit of turnover at that position, but you did you've got a couple nice players. Corey Flagg, someone who played a lot well going in, towards the end of the year. Wesley Basanthi, he's someone that really got going. But is this a position where you can see some improvement this year?
You could. I think Francisco Kiko, as he's known, so that there's no confusion between Francis and Francisco over there. They just call him Kiko. You really felt his impact in the spring game for Miami at middle linebacker. He was great at wrapping up. He's a little faster than Corey Flagg is. That's been sort of Corey's knock. He's not fast enough to be in coverage. Francisco Kiko did a great job at Washington State. I know his Pro Football Focus ranking as far as a cover linebacker was one of the best. So he's a guy that I think Miami has a lot of confidence in. The question is who's going to start next to him. And you mentioned Wesley Basaint, who played a lot as a true freshman, 276 snaps, was in the rotation a ton as the season went on out of Miami Central, another state champion, multi-state champion from the city of Miami. So, I think they've got 3 or 4 guys there at that spot that they're comfortable with. They've got a lot of freshmen that they signed. Bobby Washington is a kid you're going to hear about in the years to come. I think Bobby will be playing a lot on special teams. Malik Bryant is another true freshman you'll be hearing a lot about. One other name to know as far as a veteran, KJ Cloyd, who played at Louisville. Miami went out and got his Derek Nicholson, former Florida State Seminole. They hired him to take over the linebackers, and so he kind of brought KJ Cloyd with him. KJ may be a starter for Miami this year, or a guy who plays a lot in that rotation. So, but between the freshmen and some of those transfers, I think it is going to be a better unit overall.
Are James Williams and Cam Kitchens the best safety duo in the league?
They could be. I certainly believe Cam Kitchens, as far as being able to read quarterbacks and jump on ball on passes, go back to what he did to Drake May in North Carolina last year, and then of course that Georgia Tech game. He is really, really adept at reading quarterbacks and sort of just jumping on the ball in the air and making the play. James, I think, has to improve his tackling a little bit, especially in the open field, and that's sort of been the knock on him. But from a talent perspective, I mean, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, and you can't teach 6'5", 220 in the length that he has, right? So he's got a lot of natural gifts. Miami's going to play him some at outside linebacker this year. That's something Lance Guidry has talked about, putting him in the box, covering a tight end a little bit more, being more at the line of scrimmage to try to take advantage of some of those gifts and not leave them in the open space. But I think collectively you say, well, how many schools in the ACC have two safeties or two guys that talented? I don't know that there's very many. They're probably the best duo in the ACC. But again, they're going to need a third guy to emerge, and that's the question going into this year. I don't know who that third guy is.
Before we get into the schedule and whatnot, let's take a quick gander at special teams. I think this is a real. I mean, Borregales was really, really good. Obviously, it was a little slow to start, but was money the last three, 2/3 of the season.
Yeah.
New punter, feels like Lou Hedley's been there for a long time.
Yeah.
Return game looked like we have some new returners as well. Just kind of give us an overlook at special teams.
Yeah, you mentioned Borregales already. His brother obviously was Groza Award winner here a couple of years ago, and I think is playing professionally. I don't know if he's in the NFL now or if he was playing in the Canadian League. He's kind of been bouncing between the two of them, but he's really, really talented. A guy who has a strong leg, a guy I trust to make it from 50 yards out. A guy who certainly could probably make it from 55 if you put him in that spot. You're right about the punter. It's obviously a new punter this year. Miami, of course, went back to their Aussie roots to replace Lou Hedley and bring somebody new in. Dylan Joyce is the guy that they picked up. Now, he's not as big and burly as the previous guy. He doesn't have as many tattoos, but he's still pretty good. He's still pretty good.
That was the big question.
Yeah, he doesn't have as many tattoos as Lou does, but Dylan's not. He's not a small guy. So they like Dylan. I think he's going to do a fine job. He's going to grow as as anybody does as a true freshman when they come in. They got to kind of get used to it a little bit. You mentioned the return game. The punt return game in college football nowadays, you really don't have much of it. Everybody's, just sort of airing the ball out, taking the ball out of the returner's hand. So I'm sure we'll see a lot of Xavier Restrepo back there doing some fair catches and just sort of signaling, hey, I got the ball. Let's get the offense on the field. Kick returns will be interesting. Jacoby George really likes to he's one of Miami's receivers. He really likes to be out there involved in special teams. He likes having those opportunities. We will see how much of an opportunity they give him there. Rashard Smith is another guy, another receiver who could be seen in the kick return game as well. In the end, I think most of the time we're going to see touchbacks and fair catches. I don't think you're going to see those guys take it out too often.
So you talked about the schedule here being kind of a bear, and basically it gets that way once the ACC schedule starts in full. But up front, let's take a look at some of these games, and let me just. I'm going to make this really easy. Miami University, Miami of Ohio, and Bethune-Cookman. Okay. And here's the game that's I think most important, and I don't like to do it that way. I don't want to degrade anybody, but hey, these are warm-up games. Texas A&M though, then that's a game. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, I flew out to College Station last year for the game and was there in person, and it was a game that Miami was in, and had they been a little bit more effective in the red zone, they probably win. They were playing a style that Mario wanted, which is line up and knock the other guy on their butt and run the football and make plays in the red zone, and they just couldn't do it. This Texas A&M team, much like Miami, I think is vastly different than the version we saw last year. They went 5-7. They hired Bobby Petrino, who I think is probably one of the best play callers in college football. They have a 5-star quarterback who Miami didn't face last year because Miami went up against Haynes King, who's now at Georgia Tech. So it's a different team than the one Miami faced. It's really talented up front on the defensive line. Miami got a bit of a taste of that last year when they couldn't score in the red zone. So it's going to be a really to me, this comes down to how good is Miami's pass rush on the defensive side? Can they disrupt a second year quarterback, get him out of his flow? And then how well can they protect Tyler Van Dyke and move the football on the ground? That's what it's going to come down to. An SEC, offensive defensive line versus an ACC offensive defensive line. And most people always say, well, that's going to be the SEC team that comes out in front. But they obviously don't know Mario Cristobal too well. This is what he loves more than anything else as a former lineman himself. He's invested a lot of time and energy into getting transfers and recruits in here to upgrade that position. So, um, I think on paper you'd have to pick Texas A&M because Miami's, well, let's face it, they haven't won a home game in a while. They were winless in ACC play last year at home. Maybe if they get off on the right foot against Miami of Ohio, take care of business, get a little confidence, then maybe they're up for this game and playing the right way that they should. So, but it's not a game that I'm sitting here and just chalking up as a W because Miami's at home and Texas A&M is on the road coming off a 5-7 year. These two teams are very similar in a lot of ways in terms of a rebuild mode, new coordinators, etc. So it'll be an interesting game for sure.
This strikes me as being a 50-50 game with a little bit of a benefit of being at home, even contrary to what you just said. I'm still giving the Canes a little bit of benefit of the doubt here. I kind of feel like it's a 50-50 game, but it will be tough. Texas A&M is not the same team, but Miami isn't either. So we'll see. Like you said, on paper, Temple. I don't know what to read about Temple here. I don't want to completely blow past them, thinking I'm going to leave them in the dirt here. But
well, Kurt Warner's son, I know is their quarterback, and I did the true freshman report last year for the Athletic. I wrote a bunch of weekly sort of analysis, and he kind of had an up and down year as a true freshman, and Temple is a team that in the past had some pretty good coaches. Obviously Miami got Al Golden from Temple a few years ago. There's been some other guys that have left that program and become head coaches elsewhere. I don't know the state of their program at the moment. I know they weren't very good last year. I know that there's kind of a roster turnover there, but that's the kind of game that if you're Mario Cristobal and you're serious about getting Miami back into being Miami, that's a game you go and you win by 2 touchdowns, at least 2 or 3 touchdowns, and you sort of take care of business and you get the backups in the fourth quarter, you get them some work, which Miami hasn't done a lot of in the last few years.
So this is a tell game. If they perform well here, and like you said, crank out, 2+ or more touchdown win over Temple, this is a tell game. This tells us something's going on here. We need to keep a closer eye. This September 30th is an open date. And then on kicking off October, it's Georgia Tech. And after Georgia Tech, we'll round up the schedule.
Yeah, I think, Georgia Tech, I mentioned Haynes King earlier. He transferred over there. Miami's obviously seen him already, the Texas A&M quarterback. I spoke to Brent Key at the ACC Media Days, and he's a guy who I think did a really good job stepping into a tough situation there as far as being the head coach. Went 4-4 after he took over. And to me, look, Miami beat him last year on the road in Atlanta. But beating Georgia Tech regularly has not been something very easy for Miami. Even when Georgia Tech's sort of been down, they came to, I think the last time they were at Hard Rock, the season they only won 3 games. They beat Miami. So again, what Hurricanes team is going to show up? Which one is going to show up? Is it the one that looked pretty confident last year in the second half against Georgia Tech, or the one that was sort of fighting for its life the last couple of times Georgia Tech's come to town?
Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of combine the next two games together. You got at UNC and then you got Clemson at home. And I know a lot of people are really high on UNC this year. I'm kind of I guess I have that, we saw so many offensive coordinator changes with
Yeah.
star quarterbacks in the ACC last year, and every single one of them struggled. And I'm worried that's going to happen to Drake May again this year. And obviously, and I still don't trust defense. But Clemson, they have a new OC everyone loves who came over from TCU. I'm confident Kate Klubnik will be good, but I still think, especially in the UNC, I think the UNC game is more winnable than people realize to me for Miami.
Yeah, I think look, North Carolina with Drake May, and we still don't know the situation regarding Tez Walker if he'll get a chance to come back and play at some point this year. But um, they're a team that has won four in a row, I think, against Miami going into this game. And Miami the last couple times that they've been up there have had a chance to win in Chapel Hill and just haven't gotten it done in the fourth quarter. So Drake May is one of the best quarterbacks I've seen in the ACC, and all the time that I've been around Miami. I think you have to respect him. I think Miami goes into that game as an underdog for all of those reasons. And then of course Clemson, you obviously have to say the same thing after the last couple of times Miami's played them. Hasn't really been close. There's 7 ACC titles in 8 years. But you're right. Opportunity is there because, as you mentioned, both of those programs have new offensive coordinators. Clemson, I think, has a need for some receivers to step up. I'm not saying they're not talented there, but certainly unproven, sort of like the way Miami is. So, if Miami's offensive line shows up at home against Clemson and they do a good job fending off that front seven, maybe they have a chance to pull the upset. But I think both of those games I look at and I say on paper preseason, I'm not picking Miami to win either one of those.
Next up is home for Virginia, and all I ask is we do not see a repeat of that game last season. It's one of the worst
Yeah,
games I've ever seen.
it certainly was offensively challenged is probably the best way to call that game. I feel for what obviously for what everything that happened at Virginia at the end of last year. Obviously nobody wants to go through something like that. I got a chance to speak to Coach Elliott and his players at ACC Media Day, and certainly resilient is probably the right word, right, for what they're trying to do and overcome over there. But I don't expect Virginia to be very good. I think this is, first of all, this is the kind of season where you look at them on both sides of the ball and you say, man, where are the wins coming from, right? Like you got Tony Muskett, a guy who's come in to play quarterback from Monmouth, and Tony, I'm sure did a great job. I saw some of his numbers there, but he needs help. And Virginia, I don't know how many skill players they really have, or even offensive linemen that put a whole lot of fear into opposing teams. So that's a game Miami needs to win. They're at home, and it needs to be much more lopsided than that 14-12 barn burner we saw last year. It,
Getting flashbacks of that. At NC State is the next game. That could be a sneaky good game. It just depends on whether or not that the NC State offense is humming at that point.
you're right. And we just finished talking about Virginia. Well, Brennan Armstrong is back with Robert and I, his offensive coordinator from Virginia. And Robert went and had a lot of success last year with Syracuse and Garrett Schrader. And now he's reuniting with his former quarterback at Virginia. And, NC State, say what you want about Dave Doran, he's winning 8 or 9 games every year. And the last couple of times Miami and NC State have hooked up, they have been absolutely great games. One in Raleigh a couple years ago. I remember De'Aaron King throwing some touchdown passes to Mike Harley late to win that game for Miami on the road. And then the last time NC State came to town in Manny Diaz's final season in 21, Miami and Tyler Van Dyke pulled that one out as well. So you're right. Another 50-50 game, another toss up.
And you got this is the big game here at FSU that at Doak, and I was reading your picks column with Grace Rayner today, and I noticed you really love the Knowles this year.
Yeah, I do because the one thing you can't teach is experience, right? Like you have to just go through it. There's nothing a coach can do. And this is one of the most experienced teams in the country between all the transfers and all the guys that they've got coming back. And we saw how valuable that is for teams that go for championships. If you got an older team, you have a chance to just win games because the intangibles, right? Those guys just know where to stand. They know where to be. They know the ball just seems to bounce in their hands, right? And Florida State, I know. Listen. I went up to Tallahassee. I saw Wake Forest dismantle them, their first loss of the season last year. I watched them lose at NC State. I saw the Clemson game. They really weren't in it. But this is a team that, you have a guy in Jordan Travis who's, to me, if it wasn't for Drake May, he'd be heads and tails the favorite to win the Player of the Year award. So let's call him the second best quarterback in the
Yeah.
ACC. And he's got Keon Coleman, he's got Johnny Wilson, he's got all kinds of weapons, 8 starters on the offensive line with double-digit starts to their name. This Florida State team is in prime position. And look, they took it to Miami last year. I know Tyler Van Dyke, was playing with a bad shoulder and didn't get out of the first half, but 45-3. I'm not expecting Miami to win that game. And to me, the more important thing for Miami is to not get embarrassed. Go on the road and show that you can play with those guys, because there's some important recruiting battles to be won in state with Florida State.
Then you got Louisville at home. I think a lot of people are high on the Cardinals this year, but I also think it's going to be really hard to get so many transfers to mesh right away. But I think they're going to be much improved this year.
I agree with you 1,000%. I mean, this is a program that 25 transfers I think they ended up taking in total at Louisville, and Jeff Brom is a good coach. He had success at Purdue, got into the Big 12, Big 10 championship game last year. Jack Plummer is a guy with 25 starts, a quarterback who comes over from Cal. They've got some receivers that I really like. Jamari Thrash was really good at Georgia State last year, all conference type guy. Um, I just think this is an easy game. And you look at November and you say, man, if we can just get past Florida State, right? If you're a Miami fan, we can just get, well, no, you got Louisville the next week. Like, you
Yeah,
got a team
exactly.
that can come into your house and beat you. They've got enough talent. I know they got to replace 32 out of the 50 sacks on the defensive side of the ball, but it's still a talented team and it's not an easy game. And I don't want to call it 50-50. Miami should be favored to win that game at home, but it's certainly a game you could lose.
And then lastly at BC, which is, I think that's a probably lean Miami in that game. I just don't know who's going to be the go-to guy on offense for BC with Zay Flowers gone.
You're absolutely right. That's my biggest concern with that team, and they didn't really go out and address a whole lot in the transfer portal. It's kind of like they're just counting on the guys who came back to come back and sort of get them over the hump. Ryan O'Keefe, look, we talked about UCF a ton. Ryan O'Keefe's a UCF guy
Yeah.
who produced a lot. So maybe he's the guy who sort of breaks through for them at receiver. I know they've got some younger guys that they're excited about, but BC, it all starts with physicality in the offensive line. That's how they've always won. They've been really strong and dominant up front in the past. They get to the quarterback, they put pressure on the quarterback, and they win the offensive line battle up front. And I don't know if they're there yet. They've got some players coming back from injury, but that's a game again on paper preseason. Hey, Miami should go into Boston College and win.
And that's a look at our Miami Hurricanes football preview with Manny Navarro of The Athletic and Wide Right Pod. I'm going to check that out. Make sure that's on your list and that you're subscribed. If you want to catch all of the goings on in South Florida and a lot of other places, because as you may have noticed, if you're listening closely, Manny's doing an awful lot of other things for The Athletic as well. So, Manny, thank you so much for coming by and talking with us, giving us this great preview of what's to come for the Canes. And, I'm going to say the U is back more than they were last year. So
that's the right way to frame it, my buddy. That's right. Thanks, Jim. Thank you, William.
Thanks, man.